You're listening to the Hello World podcast number 19. My name is Sean Wildemuth, and I'm your host. The Hello World podcast is where you can hear from some of your favorite developers, authors, and speakers about how they got started in this business. We go way back to their first computer, their first code experience, and their first job. Today I have with me William R. Vaughn. He's the former principal of Beta V Corporation and Microsoft MVP who worked at Microsoft for 14 years. His previous books include 7 editions of his popular Hitchhiker's Guides from Microsoft Press and Addison Wesley, ADO Examples and Best Practices, and the bestseller ADO.NET Examples and Best Practices, and a separate edition for C# programmers. Bill is a top-rated speaker at conferences worldwide, including VBITS, Developer Connections, and TechEd, and is the author of numerous articles for SQL Server Magazine, MSDN Online, and others. He's currently lecturing for Progressive Business Technology, doing online seminars on SQL Server reporting services. As some of you know, I used to be the ADO guy, so Bill's books have always been an influence on me. I was really happy to have him on the show and to talk to him about how he got started. Let's take a listen. So I'd like to welcome Bill Vaughn to the show. I've been a big fan of yours for a long time.
Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, I've, well-informed my early days in ADO for good and bad from your books.
In other words, I got you in trouble or got you out of trouble?
Got me out of trouble. The question was whether I should have been doing ADO at all, right?
Yeah, that's the whole idea behind the books, whether ADO was the right solution for the problem.
So let's go way back to, the first computer you worked with. Were you a kid or were you in college or where did that start?
I first came in contact with computers after my career, albeit short, in the Army. I was a helicopter pilot.
Oh, really?
Went to Vietnam. If you saw the movie Apocalypse Now, Robert Duvall's unit, the guys with the black hats, yep. That was us in spades. No exaggeration. That was just what we did.
Flight of the Valkyries as well?
What was that?
Flight of the Valkyries playing out of the helicopters and everything?
As a matter of fact, we did use sound sci-fi, or not sci-fi, it's psyops to discourage and to intimidate the enemy. Actually, we just like to listen to the tunes.
Sure.
We played quite a bit of rock music on the flights. Anyway, got back to the States unscathed, and the Army announced one day, everybody's out. We don't need helicopter pilots anymore.
Oh, wow.
And they pushed out thousands and thousands of us on the same day. So there was a mad scramble for jobs. Those that had seen the writing on the wall had jobs lined up at petroleum helicopters and places that were really, really dangerous to fly.
Sure.
I was on medical leave at the time, having injured my back someplace along the line and not on flight status. So that wasn't really an option for me. Went on the GI Bill and wanted to go into radio TV. But my wife laid the Dallas Morning News in front of me, and we discovered that there were no radio TV jobs, but there's all kinds of computer jobs. The school I was going to had a rather interesting computer program, and I graduated with a bachelor's in computer science, an associate's in systems engineering, and a minor in computer science education. So it was kind of an interesting degree. And I was the operator of a 370-145, a 370 Spectre 7046, which is medium to large mainframes, right there at the college.
Oh, nice. Had you originally envisioned staying in the military the whole time, or were you drafted?
No. I had been in the military my whole life up to that point. Okay. My dad was in the military, and I ended up with a kind of a bad attitude toward officers because they were doing dumb things, and you're not allowed to say anything about it. You got kind of attitude. So when I stood up to the officers in my career, it didn't help my efficiency report.
Sure.
So I kind of, I was not a yes man, so it just didn't work out.
And did you find this any different in the computing world?
I was too naive to realize that office politics was office politics, whether it was in the military or whether it was in offices and in a company. And for years, it took me some time to work out the office politics and how to work around those issues.
Sure.
So I did mainframes until I got my degree and got my first job at the Texas Department of Public Safety in Austin. I wrote, this narcotics service, wrote a federally funded program to track all the people handling drugs in the country, in the state, pharmacists, veterinarians, dentists, anybody, doctors, and created a database from scratch with no help. As a matter of fact, I was the guy that was supposed to do. I was the first college-trained person at the DPS, and really looked down upon as a college boy.
Sure.
Because these guys were all self-taught, were old EAM card-based people that were basically taught themselves how to change from paper-based to card-based, and introduced a number of innovative procedures there that they were just dumbfounded to see.
So you said you created a database from scratch. Was this on top of, sort of the precursors to AS400 and that sort of thing, or did you really write a database?
I wrote a database.
Wow.
I wrote my own DBMS to track these applications and the credentials and to print these certificates and to keep track of the doctors that had in fact registered. The degree was a deadly serious degree. It was actually developed to be a master's degree in information systems at the University of Texas that they were testing on this undergraduate class. And it was developed by people like I am today, people that had been in the industry for many, many years and wanted to create a set of courses that would better suit bring the students up to speed so they could in fact hit the ground running when in one of these companies.
Right.
The current computer science graduates were graduating and they knew about math and Fortran and COBOL, but they didn't know what an assembler was, didn't know what a compiler was or how it worked, didn't know what an operating system was or how it worked. We created operating systems. We created databases in class. We did all this stuff in class.
Wow.
So it was a really, really fun degree, and I maxed it out. It was I just couldn't absorb it fast enough.
And what college was this at? Did I miss that?
This was a little college called Central Texas College. It was associated with Mary Hardin Baylor, but they were actually working for the University of Texas.
Oh, okay.
That system.
Interesting.
So these guys were all under their tutelage.
Nice.
It was nice, I just fortuitous to get in there. And
you left, able to actually hit the ground running because you were learning these pieces, these pretty low level pieces.
Right. We did all of our work in, an awful lot of work in assembly language. The program in Austin was written in COBOL. They had never seen a COBOL compiler before. And I wrote it all in COBOL. And I also, for some reason, put in Y2K. This was written in the 70s, mid 70s, and I anticipated Y2K, and so they didn't have to call me back to fix it.
Well, there was your mistake, right? Because that's where all the money was.
Well, it turns out after the project was done, I asked him, "What's my next project?" And he says, "You don't have another project." And I said, "Well, you mean I'm fired?" He says, "No. This project is funded is a federal funding in perpetuity."
Oh wow!
You're serious? I don't have to do anything. No, you don't have to do anything.
That doesn't sound like a lot of fun. I mean, I like the idea of
no, it wasn't.
Steady.
I was bored silly, and fortunately, EDS picked me up from there. I was recruited by EDS out of the blue, and I guess maybe they'd heard about the program, but anyway, they recruited me, and I came up and worked as basically a lead for the business the healthcare Part B.
Oh, okay.
And we worked entirely in assembly language.
And this is Ross Perot's company, EDS, right?
This is Ross Perot's company, right? So I was working in Part B healthcare. I was the guy who decided whether or not somebody's claim would be adjudicated or not. And so you would come in and you say have a procedure number, like you had your left leg amputated, And I would look it up in your records to see if you ever had your left leg amputated before. And I would let you have your left leg amputated twice. Well, it was one of the rules. And so I managed the rules. And again, I eliminated my own job by creating a database that managed the changes so somebody could sit down at a terminal and type in the changes without making changes to the program.
Oh, nice.
Got the attention of my manager and did very well there. Came back from lunch one day and Ross had put a post-it, or somebody had put a post-it on my screen that says, Ross's office now, exclamation point. And I thought that was going to be fired because I was late for lunch, coming back from lunch.
and Ross was going to fire you for that.
Yes, I thought Ross personally was going to fire me. I really did. I was scared to death. And I went up there, and his secretary says, "Oh, hi, Bill. He's waiting for you." And I go in, and Ross says, "Oh, hi, Bill. How's the wife and kids?" He knew all about my family and my new baby and stuff. And he had heard about the integrated circuit in a popular electronics magazine article that, IC, integrated circuit to take over the world kind of thing. And he said, what's up with this? And he says, well, he knew that I had built a PC, an S100 bus system in my den. I had built it myself from parts.
Right.
And he said, can you help me build the business systems division? Because I want to get on the ground floor of this technology, which was very innovative. That was really exciting. Yeah. And so I went to work for him. We did a study, and about 9 months later, we gave him a staff study, said what the industry was going to do. We kind of predicted what the industry was going to do. And we recommended him that he buy a couple of companies, and one of those companies was Microsoft. Ah. And so he invited Bill Gates to come in, and Mr. Gates showed up, as I understand it, not witnessing this personally, but as the story goes, Bill Gates showed up in the office, and the secretary was expecting the president of Microsoft Corporation to come up, but Ross's office was basically, the door was always open. Sure. As you could fit your in, people would just come in. So there's this very young man who was sitting out there, and he says, "I'm here to see Ross," and apparently she missed the point that he said he was Bill Gates. So by the time that Ross called out, says, "Where's this Gates fellow?" And the secretary says, "I don't know." And this kid says, I'm him. And she says, "Yes, you are, little boy. Of course you are." Things didn't get off to a good start. No. And he wasn't dressed in a three-piece business suit like a Ross would have expected a business professional. Yeah. So it just didn't work out.
Oh, wow.
And he missed a golden opportunity. I'm not sure if Bill would have sold, but it would have been an interesting match of money versus talent in the ground.
This would have had to been when they were still primarily a language company.
Right, yeah. Right. And I was looking for mostly the language.
Right.
He did not have DOS at the time, of course. Uh-huh. It was the MS Basic thing that he was working on.
Right.
And I saw the language as being a core component of any personal computer, whether it was at the BIOS level or whether it was at a compiled BASIC level.
Wow.
So it was probably 2 years after that I discovered that he wasn't paying me.
Oh.
And I was recruited away to a company called Mostec Corporation that was making memory chips and the Z80 processor. And I helped them develop an operating system, a general purpose operating system to replace something called FDOS or something. It was proprietary. Nothing would run on it. So I got them to use CP/M, and suddenly they had a word processor. Suddenly they had a spreadsheet and some of the other things that were available on CP/M at the time.
Was it WordStar then?
A WordStar was then.
Yeah,
right.
Because I used to have one of the CP/M luggables for some projects, and that was on the 3-inch screen. That's what we.
Right. That was a real challenge. So, the business systems division tried to get started with that. Mostec tried to take it into the hardware world, and their Z80 systems weren't really up to it. So that company basically went Chapter 11. And a number of the senior executives and I formed our own company, and I was the system software developer / software manager / architect / janitor in this new company, and we built a language translator based on an architecture that I designed, a dual processor architecture based on the Z80.
Oh, nice.
That had, I think it had 4 pages of RAM, 464K pages of RAM.
Wow. For that time, that's a lot of memory.
That's a lot of memory. And it was bloody fast. We figured out ways to use Microsoft Basic to create a new Microsoft Compile Basic to create something called a master control program, which was a character-oriented Windows or a CAL Windows user interface to launch applications and use things of that nature.
And did you get money from Disney when they stole the name?
No, I didn't. I was kind of burned about that, but I know what battles to fight.
Yeah.
But that we turned around. The IBM PC was launched, and we went to a trade show where we had a bunch of new customers lined up, and they all went to the IBM PC.
Wow.
We were dramatically faster. We had more capacity, more memory capacity, more video capacity. But nobody wanted a product from some you never heard of it company. They wanted IBM.
Right.
So they gutted the industry, and the first shakeout started to happen then. Went from there to Digital Research, who was making the original author of the CP/M operating system, the one I had been leveraging this whole time. And worked in the sales office as I wrote device drivers, and I did marketing and sales support and answered the phone and did almost everything in the sales office.
How large was Digital at this time?
Digital Research, probably, it's just a guess. I would say 1,500, 2,000 people.
Oh, okay, yeah. So heyday.
And virtually all of them were in Pacific Grove.
Uh-huh.
So I worked out of the Dallas sales office, and we were one of the most profitable sales offices around because we had Tandy Corporation, Radio Shack, Tally, Tandem, IBM Austin, and a host of others that were in our pocket, and we were selling operating systems and languages to, and flying over, all over the state doing that. And
this was in the middle of the oil boom in Texas as well, wasn't it?
Right,
yeah.
Right. There was all kinds of money going around. And Tandy desperately wanted to get into this business, and I was writing device drivers for the Tandy systems. And they had much better hardware than the IBM PC, but they wouldn't run Lotus 1-2-3, and they couldn't make a deal with Lotus, so they couldn't sell the thing.
And without Lotus, that's what everybody.
That was the Rosetta Stone. You had to have that piece of the puzzle in order to sell systems, and it wasn't about hardware in those days. It wasn't about the operating system. It was about the ability to run Lotus. So
because pre-Lotus, I mean, there were other pieces of software, but businesses started to, figure out that they could actually figure out how much money they were making and all this for the first time, and do trial and error analysis on accounting figures that they'd always had to do, by hand for weeks. And
extremely important application,
huge.
And it really formed the atomic core of the industry, so it could start to grow.
I remember early in my career, I had all these, different languages on my resume. I'd worked for some decent companies, and I went through a series of jobs where the most important thing on the resume was that I could write macros in 1-2-3.
There you go.
Really? Okay.
And there were, once Microsoft kicked in, there was all these lawsuits about the user interface and what stuff was patented by 1-2-3 and so forth.
Yeah, the slash commands and yeah.
So that company, I came back from vacation, and they had basically closed all of the sales offices, and I had lost a job again. They didn't go bankrupt immediately, but they may as well have had. They closed the sales office. I went from there to a company called CPT Corporation in the Infomart there in Dallas, out of the sales office, and was writing training materials and training their support staff and so forth. And they went up to Eden Prairie and convinced them to create a general purpose system. They had the hardware and the distribution and the manufacturing and everything they needed, and they didn't have an operating system. So I convinced them to create a CP/M based operating system that would run the software, run 1, 2, 3, and those kinds of things, and the new generic word processors. And they created one. Unfortunately, I think it took 18 minutes to boot. So they had missed something along the line, and it cost $22,000. So they were just confused. It was based on a very fancy RISC processor, but it was strange.
Well, it's $1,000 per minute booting. I think that's a good,
Yeah, that's pretty. Big truck. Once it was up, it was slow. So
as long as it's slow when it's up.
And they had a very nice word processor built on Unix. Very nice, big screens, tall screens, crisp black and white displays, and a deadly serious word processor, and all kinds of neat stuff that they simply couldn't continue to sell in a general purpose marketplace. So they went Chapter 11, and I was out of a job again.
So did your friends start to trade companies based on whether you start working there or not? I mean,
right. They started selling off stock as soon as I started working there. Well, I was still working for CPT, and I saw that they were not going to be able to survive. They had already brought in a guy to tear the company down and start selling off the assets, that kind of thing. And I got a call from Microsoft. A friend of mine that was working in digital research invited me to come up and interview, and I did. And they offered me a job, but it was a significant decrease in salary. If I took stock, they would give me even less.
Right.
And I had already had stock in ES and in Moztec Corporation and Challenge System stock and CPT stock and all these options and stuff that were worthless. Yeah. And I told my wife, it's an opportunity. It's a job. We're going to have to move. And she says, well, it's for more money, right? I says, well, no, it's for less money. And so she wasn't really thrilled about all this.
No, sure.
So she stayed at home and stayed in Dallas and Garland and tried to sell the house. And it took over a year to sell the house, but she finally moved up. And I worked in a division or a group in Microsoft that worked one man away from Steve Ballmer. And the guy we worked for had almost retired. And so he was kind of low profile. So we were constantly in contact with Steve Ballmer.
Interesting. And they were up in Redmond by then, right?
We moved into buildings 1 through 4. We were the first occupants of buildings 1 through 4. They had just moved in there the weeks before I came on board.
Wow.
So that's the only place I ever knew. Nice buildings. And so I did that. This is Windows Developer Liaison. So I was helping Microsoft work with this brand new product called Windows version 1 and trying to get device drivers, hardware manufacturers to adapt their hardware to Windows so you can run other hardware in the standard IBM PC backbone.
And so you'd work with peripheral manufacturers and video card makers and that sort of thing?
Right. Okay. Right. And I also worked with one of the biggest customers was right there in Dallas. So I was going in and out of Dallas all the time because all these hardware manufacturers, the National Semiconductor and Texas Instruments, M&M and STB, these guys are all based out of Dallas. Yeah. So I was constantly going back to Dallas and visiting, sleeping in my own bed. And dealing with a company called Micrographics, which is the people that made this CAD program that ran on Windows. Well, let's say it functioned on Windows. It was at one point, it was so slow you could watch it paint the pixels. And if you consider that the processor at the time was an 8088, not an 8086, but an 8088, which duplexed the memory bus to reduce manufacturing costs, it was just as slow as it could be. And they were constantly whacking on us to improve performance in the device drivers. And if I did, I got the device driver performance up quite a bit, but it was still, there was not happy campers. And eventually that division closed down when IBM picked up Windows. And Steve came in and says, we're basically done and we want to do other things with the resources. And I was out of a job again.
Wow.
To make a long story short.
Now, is Micrographics the same company that eventually became now I can't think of who they became. Because they were around for a long, long time, and they did more than CAD.
For a while. It's the Grayson brothers, George and Paul Grayson, were the CEOs, the brothers. Mm-hmm. So I don't know actually what became of them.
Oh, okay, I might be getting them confused with another company.
So I was out of a job again because my group at Microsoft had lost funding and gone bankrupt again. So I went to Microsoft University because it turns out that I was one of the only people in the country that knew how to talk about OS2, which is, since I was Steve's OS2 speechwriter, I was ideal candidate for this. And I worked at Microsoft University as a consultant for a while until it reorganized, and then I was hired blue card about a year later.
So let me ask you that, because that's always a little confused me. Microsoft's relationship with OS2. Now, they were building Windows, which I thought was a competitor to OS2 at the time, or was it about running Windows on OS2 versus MS-DOS?
No, Windows was a set of floppies that ran on top of MS-DOS.
Right.
And when IBM came in, they says, we want you to create a server class operating system. And CPM actually bid on this. Digital Research bid on this while I was still working for Digital Research.
Oh, interesting.
And Digital Research had CPM 86, or this new operating system that was designed to run the 286.
Right.
And it was a brilliant version of NPM 86, and it was going to work fine. And Digital Research had been building operating systems for quite some time, eons in the time frame of the life cycle of the PC,
sure.
But still for a long time. But when they took it to the NCC conference, if I recall correctly, they put in a brand new 286 processor that they got from Intel. They got it the night before. And what Intel, in its infinite wisdom, has done had fixed a bug. and Microsoft and Digital Research had created the ability to switch threads from one thread of operation to another instantly by using this backdoor that reset the processor.
Oh, wow.
They reset the processor, and it turned it back on again very quickly, and they trapped it and switched to this next context, and suddenly they were in another context, and they could run off with that thread and then do it again and switch back to the first one. And it worked like a charm, but Intel fixed this bug, and suddenly the operating system would work, and it was come time to demonstrate to IBM, it simply didn't work.
Right.
So IBM turned around and says, okay, Microsoft, what do you have? And they had something that they thought would work, and that eventually became OS2. And they worked with Hersley England for the user interface.
Interesting.
And it was a very strange relationship, strained from the very beginning, but that's how OS2 was born.
Interesting, because I came into it after it had been out on the market, and there was people on both sides that digging in their heels about which would win, and interesting.
So I taught OS2 for a while, and I ended up teaching OS2 until something called SQL Server came to market, and Microsoft and DBase, Ashton Tate, created a marketing pairing along with Ashton Tate, along with Sybase,
right, to
create this product that Microsoft wanted to improve and leverage into and work into OS2 OS2. So I became the head of the SQL Server team and started hiring trainers to teach OS2 and teach SQL Server.
Right.
And I hired people like Kimberly Tripp, that is one of the world's best trainers and authorities on SQL Server.
Absolutely.
At this point in time.
Still is.
It still is, yeah. Making a ton of money doing that. She just blows me big. but we did that for 5 years, and we were going great guns until there was a let's just say a management change at Microsoft University, and suddenly they weren't doing as well. And instead of making a little money, they were losing a lot of money.
Right.
So suddenly I came back from vacation again. I had no job. So here I was again.
You really should stop going on vacation.
Yeah, I had to stop. And my wife said, "You're never going to go on vacation." But what I had in my head was everything you ever wanted to know about OS2. I had also been working on and closely with the Visual Basic team to create the Visual Basic thunking layer to interface to something called DB library, which is the lowest level interface to SQL Server.
Right.
So if you wanted to write an assembly language program or a C program to get straight to SQL Server, you wrote to DB-lib, which created these TDS packets that were sent to the server, and you basically created this dialog. Well, I wrote a VB front end interface to this, so you could use right from VB, you could basically link into DB-lib. So I went home and I wrote a book on that. And I basically, it was a 380 some odd page book that I ended up formatting myself, editing myself. You can tell it's edited myself because it's terribly edited. And I got interest from the Microsoft Consulting Services people who started buying them 2s and 3s and then 4s and 5s. And then I was selling 50 copies a month and then 50 copies a week out of the house.
Yeah.
So we had a manufacturing facility right there at the house. I would take a floppy disk, a little 3.5-inch floppy, take it down to the printer. They would stick in this big room size IBM printer, and they would squirt out books. So I was doing demand publishing, self-publishing. This was in the early 90s.
Wow.
A long time ago.
Yeah.
And shipping that stuff would sit one bookstore in London picked it up, and they were paying the shipping to London.
Wow.
So it was sold all over the world. I sold one copy to China. It was very, very popular there. And finally, I got a job in the VB team writing documentation because I happened to know something about SQL Server. And they didn't want me to talk so much about SQL Server as they wanted me to talk about Access. And I was not an Access fan.
Really? I think it's a enterprise quality database. Wait, no, I'm getting that backwards.
So you're getting confused with something else.
I actually purchased Access. When Access 1.0 came out, I put down my $100 because I thought, this might be useful. And no. Okay, go.
Well, Access had really excellent marketing.
Yes.
And that's the problem I had with it. He says it's not a bad product. It has limitations, and the architecture, it really doesn't lend itself to scaling. And it is, as a front end to SQL Server, it's really not great. And the marketing is kind of led you to believe that once you create an Access app, you throw a switch or push a button, and suddenly it's a good front end to SQL Server, and you can just migrate right over to SQL Server, although very, very little of that was true.
Yeah.
So I was nearly fired several times by the Access team, standing in front of on a podium someplace and calling Access we have several different kinds of databases out there, folks. We have Oracle and DB2 from IBM and SQL Server from Ashton Tate and from Microsoft. And then we have the toy databases, the Accesses and the B-Trees and the toy databases that are designed for very few users, and they're really very different in architectures. And my pager went off and it said, "Shut up about Access." And apparently the Access product manager was in the back of the room. He had called his boss's boss, and who called my boss's boss, who called my boss, who texted me and told me to cool it.
That wouldn't be the first time you were asked to be quiet on stage.
No, it wasn't the first time, nor would it be the last. So I went from the VB team and wrote the data access documentation for VB 2, 3, 4, and 5, and got permission from Steve Ballmer, which was a modern miracle, to publish my own books. So he gave me permission to moonlight and do my own books. And I was the first author at Microsoft to do that and be able to keep the royalties. There's a number of authors at Microsoft, but all of them were required to sign over their royalties to Microsoft. that was a first as well. Went from there when I got bored writing documentation and kind of saw the handwriting on the wall as far as Visual Basic was concerned. I went to the work in the marketing team and I became the enterprise product manager for Visual Studio and launched Visual Studio 6. And it quickly came to my senses and decided that marketing was not for me. They couldn't decide whether I walked on water or whether I was the devil incarnate.
Both are probably true.
Yes, both are probably true. And the keynote speech that I gave at VBITS one year, where I characterized, it said that I really liked VB.NET. I really did. It's a great language, and it has a lot of power, and it leverages the .NET framework. And the problem is that it wasn't Visual Basic. It was a different language. It's like saying COBOL is Fortran. It was just different. It's just a different language. Yeah. And I said, you could have called it anything. You could call it Visual Fred, and it would have been better. And the product manager for Visual Basic, Mr. Mendez, I think, was on the front row, and he nearly had a stroke.
But you weren't the first or last person to say that.
Did it say Visual Fred? No, I was the first guy to call it Visual Fred.
Yeah, I will give you that.
It was named after my daughter, Fred. It came to mind.
That's funny.
But I wasn't the first one to say that it wasn't Visual Basic, and it shouldn't be called Visual Basic. And they had other names for it, and they switched to VB.NET at the very last minute. So it was done kind of on the spur of the moment, against my better wishes.
Sure.
So I went to internal technical education for a couple more 3 years and taught developers inside Microsoft. So not a lot of public facing, except for the tech ed talks that I was doing. And I was ended up being a top speaker at Tech Ed, made Kimberly Tripp crazy that year. And did those kinds of things. So I was doing VBITS and those kind of conferences, VS Live, lots of time, lots of traveling, and finally retired from Microsoft in 2000 and went basically for my own company and started writing more books. And by 2010, I had a dozen books in print. They're not all in print because the technical books have a shelf life of bananas.
About 4.5 hours, I'm told.
Yeah, about 4.5 hours. Yeah. And they just didn't last very long. And in 2010, I started writing fiction. So I started writing my fantasy fiction books. And since then, I've got 3 of those written and published, again, self-published. And I have probably 90% of the 4th book, an entirely new genre, time travel book.
Nice.
Written, and it's almost ready to go. The
first 3 books are in a series, correct?
That's right. It's called the Seldith Chronicles, Seldith, the Seldith Chronicles. So if you just Google Seldith, you'll find it.
Oh, nice. Well, wow, that's an immense tour of a lot of very important companies. That's impressive.
And it's like surfing and wiping out and paddling out, backing back out.
Well, I hope you're not taking any more vacations. That's all I'm
taking lots of vacations. I'm doing lots of cruising and taking pictures, and I've traveled all over the world. And
you don't have a job to not come back to then.
The job I have, the writing job, requires that I go to these various countries to take pictures and to gain technical information about the books that I'm writing. So this is all tax deductible.
Oh, nice. It's all research.
It's all research, of
Absolutely.
course.